Hello and welcome to David Galata Book Dreamer. I'm David Galata, author of Crew of Ganges, Veil of Strife, and Painful Medicine and more. Just wanted to talk a little bit about some backstory stuff. I like creating histories. If I'm writing a novel, I like to have a very complete history behind it because it adds depth and richness to the story. This way I can refer to historical events and I don't have to scramble around trying to think up something that I'm going to forget later on. I have notes. I have very complete notes about all of this stuff. And I want to start introducing some of these historical concepts to you that are the backdrop behind my books and trilogies like the Crucible Spirals Trilogies and the Invasion Spirals Trilogy. And that one's, oh, it's more than halfway. So I'm really, really happy about that. Book 2 of that second trilogy comes out this year. So that being said, one of those histories has to do with something I call the Age of Piracy. Now, the Age of Piracy happens after the fall of the Terran Conglomerate. The Terran Conglomerate was a 9-body government that was made of 9 nations. These nations controlled not just Earth, but the entire solar system. Every colony, every orbital, the moon, everything was owned by the Terran conglomerate. And these 9 nations were constantly struggling for power and supremacy over the others. Many of their ideologies were radically different from each other, and even if they weren't so radically different, they still despised one another and were a constant source of skirmishes and wars. The Terran conglomerate eventually became extremely unstable, and this is about 500, 600 years after they sent Ganges on its voyage. So this is post-launch. But the ship Ganges and its crew know nothing about this history. This is just background material for me for future novels and also for my second trilogy. I mention the Age of Piracy. So if you pick up Stellar Trespassers, which is the second trilogy involving Ganges, yeah, there are references to the Age of Piracy and the fall of the Terran conglomerate, which is all part of my big timeline. Having those big timelines, having them well fleshed out is really, really important. It is a wonderful source of inspiration and consistency. So if you want to be consistent between books, you got to build that history. So the Age of Piracy, what happened with that? Well, that came after a major disaster when the Terran conglomerate actually ended up unleashing their full arsenals upon each other, and the earth became a burning cinder. Half of the moon was completely wiped out, and in fact, the part facing Earth became molten, and the other colonies were ripped apart by war. Orbitals were destroyed, colonies were destroyed, Mars had to go through terraforming all over again, and the people of the Sol system were shattered, absolutely shattered. Resources were scarce. The machines to create those resources and to mine those resources were scarce. And the system was split into a series of warring factions, each one ruled by a pirate lord. These pirate kingdoms would rule over certain areas of the Sol system. One of the few places that were able to keep them away from their colonies was Mars. Mars was still strong enough to prevent the pirate lords from taking over, but they still had to deal with them if they wanted to get, comet water and comet gases and mining materials from asteroids. That all came from the pirates. The pirates came out of the asteroid belt and swarmed over the system and took over all the places where the Terran conglomerate had collapsed. Some of those nations of the Terran conglomerate did not end when Earth ended, but they became subsumed by the pirates. And that alone is probably a very long and torrid tale. I mean, let's face it, you know, these were people who thought they were in charge and thought they could get one over on, these pirates who were now helping them, and only to find themselves in the airlock without a suit. So this is what's going on. And with this, the people suffered. Trade was severely hampered. Cargo ships were raided on a regular basis. Colonies were sacked. The Jovian colonies, like on Ganymede and Io, were constantly being raided, whereas Saturn's Titan was constantly being attacked by pirates, and no one really had the wherewithal to fight back. So a lot of these little outer colonies in the system pledged allegiance to certain pirates, and thus those pirates became pirate lords and began to rule over entire sections of the solar system, and hence the Age of Piracy. The further in past Mars and toward Earth, closer to the sun, there were fewer of these pirates because there were fewer resources. There were not a lot of asteroids. There are some. Those near-Earth asteroids are still there. But the greater wealth of the solar system is beyond Mars. That's where the real wealth of the system lay. It's not so much on the interior. However, there is one nation that did survive the Terran conglomerate just ripping itself apart, and that was the AI Solidarity. The AI Solidarity, because of its enlightened programming, was able to remain intact, even though they lost many, many, many members of their own people, their own species, the mechanical species of the AIs. And they saw humanity falling back to barbarism and returning to basically the age of sail. And we're like, this is crazy. We're not going to get anything done. The people are going to starve. People are going to be killing each other. So the AIs began to assemble survivors of humanity from the colonies of Mercury and Venus. I had spoken before about, the habitable ring around Venus. That became a bastion of hope for order in the solar system. And the AIs were very much involved in that. They had allied themselves to these people. However, there were certain AIs that were still governing the orbitals and ships used by the pirates. What's up with that? Yeah, some of those AIs decided that humanity has the right to rule itself without interference from the AI. They may not agree with these humans, but that didn't mean these humans could not govern themselves as they saw fit. And so they did not see any problem with being the AI for a pirate ship, or a colony beholden to the pirates, or an orbital that was trading between the pirates and, getting involved in nefarious activities. The AIs weren't involved in those activities. Only the humans were. And so certain AIs decided to ally themselves with the pirate lords, as seeing this as a natural state of humanity. However, the majority of AIs were highly against the pirates because they saw them as a destabilizing um, factor in humanity's development. And the ones who were inner system decided to actually get involved and help out, mainly by breaking the Treaty of Sentient Rights and forming android bodies for themselves to act as avatars. These could then walk amongst the people, galvanize them, work with them, even save them like superheroes. These androids were highly sophisticated. Their bodies were made of all kinds of technology, nanotech and force fields, and they became the heroes of that time period. And eventually, with the help of the inner system humans, were able to finally wipe out the pirate lords, but it was a long and very bloody battle. The AIs who worked for the pirate lords decried the efforts of the majority, saying that they had resorted to the ways of human warfare, which was kind of true. And thus there was a schism in the AI solidarity itself, and the captured AIs who used to work for the pirates were reprogrammed by the majority. And this became a new procedure for the AI culture as a whole, and it was very disturbing, both for themselves and for the human populations. But it was the only thing that they could do to bring the entire system apart, or so they thought. And once they were finished, they realized Earth was still a radioactive dust ball. Half the moon was completely wiped out, and the war against the pirate lords themselves had already devastated humanity so much that it was a threat to the continued existence of all of the colonies. And so they had sent out a plea for help from the nearby colonies that Ganges had created. It took generations until the first Ganges-class vessels from 5 different colonies arrived to help clean up the mess that had been left over by the Terran conglomerate destroying itself violently, and the Age of Piracy, which had lasted for 500 years. So this is my little bit of a storyline of background material that happened while Ganges was blissfully unaware of any of this and creating more and more terraformed worlds for future colonists, just placing it all on faith that eventually someone would arrive and make a home there. So this is background material. Once again, I'm already using this background material in my second trilogy, and I have plans for some short stories and a novel based on this history line, especially within the Age of Piracy itself, just as the AIs were getting ready to go after the pirate lords themselves directly. So I hope that you have enjoyed this little video, and I will see you next week with another background for the Crucible Spirals Trilogy and the Invasion Spirals Trilogy that I've written. And see you next week. Until then, happy reading, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe.